There was a video that came out yesterday talking about Oregon's controversial drug decriminalization plan. Drugs were decriminalized 2 years ago, to the best of my understanding, maybe 3 years ago. In the last couple of years, drugs were decriminalized in the state of Oregon. Oregon is my home state. I have seen firsthand the degree to which this has caused problems in our society. In the society of Oregon, that is. And so I want to watch this video, and I want to dive into this a little bit more with you guys. Let's see how it's going so far. Oh, by the way, this is in the current news because the current Oregon governor, Tina Kotek, is deciding to recriminalize drugs, that this program of decriminalization has not worked. In fact, I think I would call it a colossal failure. And she has decided to recriminalize drugs. Here we go.
It is one of the most progressive places in the country, and nearly 4 years after Oregonians voted to decriminalize hard drugs, the move has ignited controversy, some even advocating to make them illegal once again, making this state a cautionary tale on drugs. In tonight's Prime Focus, our Ashin Singh looks at the dilemma the state is now facing. All sides admit something isn't working. The question is, what now?
Oregon is 3 years into a revolutionary approach to treating drug addiction.
Revolutionary.
But in one of the most progressive states in the country, some are getting cold feet.
You just don't see as many police stopping people on the sidewalks for using drugs.
The voters of Oregon were misled about what path we were going down.
It didn't create homelessness. It didn't create crime. But I think by almost everyone's accounts, it's made all of those things worse.
This legislation, decriminalizing drugs 3 or 4 years ago, has most certainly increased homelessness. It has most certainly increased homelessness for a multitude of reasons. Probably the first and foremost, I would say this. Okay, so let's talk about homelessness here in the U.S. Let's talk Oregon first off specifically. According to the 2023 point-in-time count, thousands of people are living unsheltered on our streets. This is portland.gov. Overall, homelessness in Portland increased by 65% from 2015 to 2023. 65% increase. Okay? And drugs have been decriminalized for the last several years. 65% increase. Now, let's take a look. The development of homelessness across the country. This is in the entire U.S. The total number of homeless people in the United States by year. Okay, so this was 2015 to 2023, and it was a 65% increase. Across the nation, from 2015 to 2020, it's maybe gone up 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people across the entire country. Most certainly, this legislation has resulted in more homeless people in Oregon. And I'll tell you why. Just talking to people and seeing videos, there's a lot of other videos we've watched about the Portland drug problem. You're having drug immigration. You're having people from all over the country migrate to Oregon, migrate to Portland. And it's not just, it's Salem, it's Corvallis, it's Eugene. It's pretty much every big city up and down I-5, but Portland has been hit the hardest. Salem is really, really bad too. People are moving from all over the country to Oregon because they know they can do drugs. It's sort of a safe haven for drug use because they know that there's no punishment for it. So people are moving from all over the country. And by the way, that's shown here. 65% increase in the last 8 years in Portland. And this is I did the math earlier. This is about a 1.4, 1.5% increase. You live in Washington, you can't speak firsthand on Oregon. It's literally the blue cities that cause problems, not drugs. You live in Washington, you can't speak firsthand on Oregon? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I have lived 27 years of my life in Oregon. And when I moved out, I moved to Vancouver, which is 10 minutes north of the border. Are you like, what the hell are you talking about? You think I haven't seen this firsthand? Man, this guy is insane. Okay, so across the nation, you've had a 1.4, 1.5% increase. Oregon in the last 8 years, Portland specifically, 65% increase. I see the comment, well, that only goes up to 2020. What about this other chart is 2023. Okay. Well, this is an article from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This goes up to 2022. On a single night in 2022, roughly 582,000 people were experiencing homelessness in the United States. Okay, so this is 582,500, and this is 500. Okay, so you had a 2,000 person increase from 2020 to 2022. Only 2,000. 2,000. That's not that maybe puts it up to a 2% increase over that eight-year time period, as opposed to 65%. I'm telling you, there has been a huge amount of drug migration. People coming from all over the country to Portland, to Oregon, Washington as well, California as well. Similar legislation, because they know they can get away with doing drugs and not get caught up in it.
It hasn't worked. We are still in an addiction crisis. We are in a housing crisis. Measure 110 cannot fix that.
In your mind, was ballot measure 110 a mistake?
Uh-oh. Yeah, it was. So, by the way, pretty much the way that ballot measure 110 worked was they first off decriminalized the drugs, and they said that they were going to offer a huge amount of funding for recovery programs, halfway houses, clean workers programs, clean living programs, and then the money disappeared. The money never ended up getting spent in those ways. So what happened was there was almost no additional recovery support for these people, but the drugs were decriminalized. Okay? So what happens if people vote on this legislation under the presumption that there's going to be not only decriminalization but also support for these people to help them get off the streets and help them get clean, and the support on the back end never gets funded, and decriminalization happens, and there's nothing else beyond that? Guess what? You end up with a lot of drug-addicted homeless people. Shocker.
We are going to walk through downtown and offer some information and resources to our community and the houseless people.
Thanks to a ballot measure in 2020, small amounts of lethal drugs have been decriminalized in the state.
Yeah.
And open drug use is a common sight.
I come from downtown. I come from being homeless, and I accepted and asked for help and needed a lot of resources and received the help. So today I'm out here helping my people because I've been there.
Good for this guy.
Been there.
Yeah. How you doing, my friend? Have you been down to the BHRC Center?
Rico Mejia
Hey, man, good to see you.
walks the streets of Portland with a group of volunteers from local advocacy groups
I'm
Good
with
for
the
this guy.
BHRC outreach team and Sarah.
to find people who may need treatment.
We get you down to the center and you can get a shower.
Getting those in the throes of addictions into
I wonder what percent of these people living down here drug addicted actually want treatment. How many of them would take treatment if it was offered to them? And by the way, this guy's out here offering treatment. There are treatment support hotlines. And I know, like I said, we acknowledged a minute ago, there's not, the money disappeared. There's not a lot of financial support for recovery programs. Let's imagine there was. How many of them would actually accept it? Let's keep watching.
the treatment can sometimes feel like a losing battle.
Can you explain sort of this idea that recovery is a process, it's a continuum?
This is about small victories, it's about shelter, it's about building relationships. We're out here letting people know the information about our center, and a lot of times it takes people a while to receive the help. They are not going to make that split decision right away.
In 2020, voters approved ballot measure 110, which decriminalized possession of small amounts of some drugs.
Yeah.
It provided funding to addiction recovery services, using some of the revenue generated from legal cannabis sales in the state.
Okay.
Basically, if you buy marijuana from a dispensary in Oregon, you're partially funding resources that help people suffering from addiction get back on their feet.
Morning,
Okay.
Dan.
Morning.
How you doing?
Good.
That money helps people like Dan Hood.
We're going to discuss those 4 applications we put in.
Okay.
He's looking for a steady job after a few false starts getting sober.
The new position, the staffing training with Central City Concern just opened up today.
Let's go for it.
Do you remember trying it for the first time?
I do. You feel like you can do anything in the world. You have the most confidence. Just feel unstoppable, you know?
And in that time, how often were you using and what were you using?
I was using heroin and meth every day. And then
not good.
Later on, I started doing fentanyl every day.
Bad. What do you want people
Very
across
bad.
the country to know about this process, about what it's like, about what you guys are maybe getting right or wrong here?
The harm reduction helps a lot, man. I think it helps people get more honest. They can open up more rather than trying to hide.
You hopeful about your future?
Oh yeah, I got nothing but to look.
Okay, chat. If these drugs are decriminalized, do you think there will be more or less drugs in Portland? Let's talk about one thing. Let's talk about Portland. In Portland, if having and using these drugs is decriminalized, will there be more or less drugs? Most people would say more. Okay, let's move on from there. If there are more drugs in your society and there's no punishment, criminal punishment for using them, do you think there will be more drug users or less drug users? Will there be more people trying it out once or twice and getting it? Keep in mind, a lot of these drugs are so addictive. You try it out one time, you're addicted, it's over. Okay? So if there's more drugs and no punishment, criminal punishment, do you think more people will be willing to try it out one time and then guess what? Boom, they're addicted? Okay, yeah, obviously more. And that seems to have happened.
Look up.
Dan credits his success to Recovery Works, an organization run by Joe Bezeghi, who helps addicts get into treatment. The Recovery Center.
Do you want to put that person in prison? This is what I would say, and this is what Portugal has done post-2008. If you're caught with drugs, you've got two options: go to prison or go to a compulsory rehabilitation program. You've got two options. You got drugs. Everyone likes to talk about Portugal. Portugal, after the year 2008, guess what their program is for the last, 16 years? If you're caught with any amount of drugs, it's prison or recovery program. Those are your two options. You don't just get to be homeless injecting fentanyl on the side of the road like we have in Portland. You've got two options: go to prison or go to recovery. That's it. And by the way, seems to have worked pretty well for Portugal.
Opened a year ago with funding from Measure 110.
Come on in. Welcome to Recovery Works Newburgh.
Okay.
This is opioid replacement therapy. So if I take this medicine, fentanyl will not have the same effect on me.
People come in completely addicted to fentanyl and get on our Sublocade program, and you'll start to see people truly change. When they're not spending their time chasing fentanyl and they're feeling good, they can really be productive members of society.
We provide safe injection equipment, so a variety of different syringes.
Haven Wheelock has been working in harm reduction for decades. Now she runs a harm reduction center in downtown.
What if they can't afford the $20,000 inpatient recovery program, however much it is? State funded. Yeah, in Portugal, state funded. By the way, I think a lot of people that talk about Portugal and, in Portugal they decriminalized all the drugs and everything was good. And we should do the same thing here. I think a lot of people actually don't know exactly what Portugal did. Do I have an image up for you guys? Yeah, okay, let's talk about Portugal real fast, okay? The Portuguese national government adopted the majority of the committee's recommendations, passed an accompanying law number 30 in the year 2000, and began to set up commissions for the dissuasion of drug abuse under the Ministry of Health. Under the policy, this is in the year 2000, when police come across people who are using or possessing drugs, they confiscate, this is in 2000, they confiscate the substances and refer them to a dissuasion commission. This commission is comprised of one official from the legal arena and two from the health and social service arenas who determine whether and to what extent the person demonstrates dependency on drugs. So first off, if they find you with drugs, they take the drugs from you. We don't do that in Oregon. The drugs are decriminalized to such a degree that you just get to keep them. Okay. In fact, we've got clean injection sites where you can actually come to a government-funded site and you can do drugs in the government safe site, and the government will give you injection materials, smoking materials. So not only do we not take the drugs from the person, but we also have provided places for them to do drugs. and materials for them to do drugs with. Okay? And this is just in 2000. And actually in 2008, they get much more conservative. After 2008, the sharp increase of sanctions for drug use, which includes fines, suspended or effective, jail time, suspended or effective, and a combination of fines and jail time, is seemingly attributable to the establishment of jurisprudence. According to the SICAD, in 2019, the Supreme Court judgment in 2008 is explicitly stated about 99%. Okay, so what happened in 2008 in Portugal is they had a Supreme Court ruling that said that, okay, listen, just referring people to recovery programs and taking their drugs, it's actually not enough. So they already were taking their drugs, which is more than we do here in Oregon, and refer them to a recovery program. We don't even take their drugs. In Portugal in 2008, 8 years after this law, they said, this is not enough. We're going to start fining and imprisoning people. And so when we see this blue line go up here, total of convicted individuals for drug use, this conviction in the case of Portugal means we're going to take your drugs. And then 2, you're convicted of using drugs and having drugs. 3, you've got 2 options now. You can either go to prison or you can go to a recovery program. So for 8 years, 2000 to 2008, Portugal took your drugs and gave you a recommendation to a program. After 2008, if you have drugs, they take the drugs, you're convicted, and now you go to prison, or you have a prison deferment program where you can go to a recovery treatment facility instead. Okay, so when people talk about, oh, in Portugal, drugs are legal and you can do whatever you want and there's no problem and everything worked out fine, that's actually quite literally what they did not do. They did not do that at all by any means. From the get-go in 2000, when they passed this legislation in Portugal, they were already harsher than we are here in the U.S. because at least they took the drugs from the people. In Oregon, we don't even do that. It's all good to have the drugs.
Town Portland.
110 allows us to engage them and help them get the supports before that transition to injection happens.
And she also helped write Ballot Measure 110.
Great.
What have you made of the public outcry against Measure 110?
It's made me sad that people want something to blame.
Does it feel like a scapegoat?
It definitely feels like a scapegoat.
Of course this ballot measure is to blame. Of course it is. This was not a problem. This was not a problem before the ballot measure went into effect.
I feel like people are blaming Measure 110 for problems that existed before 110.
Uh-huh.
Oregon has some of the highest rates of addiction in the country.
Uh-huh.
We have some of the lowest access to treatment in the country. The crisis here has been here for a long time.
How about public use, not just possession?
Public use is a messy scenario.
Yeah. Kind of a loophole.
It is a loophole. But the solution isn't putting people in jail for it. The solution is making sure people have access to housing, making sure people have safe places to use and safe places to be.
So why don't we do that rather than decriminalizing? Okay, if we want to talk about the Portugal method, which seems to have worked, why don't we, 1, if you're caught with drugs, we're going to take the drugs away from you, and then guess what? You've got 2 options. Go to jail or go to a compulsory recovery facility, which is not what we did. That's not at all what we did. The way we did it has been a total failure.
Right now, people who get tickets for open drug use are given a choice. Pay the fine or call a hotline that will direct them to treatment services while the fine goes away.
Uh-huh.
Portland police are on the front lines of open drug dealing and drug use and see their duties constantly change.
So this is what Portugal found. This is another problem with the way that we. I'm a Portland police officer, and I see you with drugs. 1, I don't take the drugs. 2, I write up a fine for you, and you can get rid of the fine if you call the hotline. Okay, so this is what Portugal found: is that people that are addicted to drugs are not going to pay the fine, and they're not going to call the hotline. And this is why after 8 years, they changed their approach. They changed the approach to forcing people to go to jail or go to recovery. First off, we're going to apprehend you. You're being detained. You either go to jail now or you go to recovery program. Because telling them, hey, Mr. Drug User, hey, we're going to trust you. You either need to call this phone number, here it is, or you have to pay this fine. Here's a piece of paper. Go pay it. Turns out they're not the most proactive or reliable people, and they ended up not doing either of those things.
It's gone from like property crimes to stolen cars, and for the last year or so, year and a half, it's been predominantly fentanyl, where fentanyl has basically become our full-time job. But it is not a crime to use drugs in public in Oregon currently.
So what do you guys do?
It is not a crime in Oregon to use drugs in public. You're not committing a crime. How insane is that? That's crazy.
When you do see someone using in public.
If we have outreach workers that day, we offer you the chance to talk to an outreach worker, but you're going to get a $100 citation for possession of a controlled substance. I provide you with a treatment card. It has the screening number. That's the card.
This is the card.
You call that number to do a health screening. My understanding is they'll also pay the ticket for you.
The hotline is now seen as a symbol of Measure 110's shortcomings. After 3 years and over 7,600 drug violations.
Oh boy. Chat, how many people have called this hotline in 3 years? We've got 7,600 violations written up. How many people have called this thing? Has it been a success, the hotline approach?
Only about 200 calls.
Oh my God. Out of 7,600 violations written up, the cops are down there busting their ass to write these people up and help them out. 200 people have called to seek treatment. This is a treatment hotline. Only 200 people have made that call. Obviously, this is not the approach that needs to be taken.
Calls have been made.
What's frustrated you about all this?
Every day I tell people about Measure 110, and we're years into this, where I'm like, oh, it's a $100 citation for the treatment.
Why would homeless have phones? You think these fiends have phones? Yeah, they do. Of course they do. Yeah, of course they do. I understand how in your brain you think what you just said makes sense, but they do all have phones, by the way. This is like one of these like theory crafting takes versus reality takes. All these people have phones. Go walk around downtown. All of them have phones. Like I hate to be rude. I understand if you haven't been down there and seen them, how you could think that they don't have phones. But yeah, they most certainly have phones. Yeah, they do. Also, there's a lot of public phones you can use, no doubt. 100%. There's recovery centers all over Portland.
Card, and people are like, well, I voted for that, and then they're upset with me about it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you.
Like if your argument is, oh, well, they don't have money to get a phone. Well, how do they have money to buy drugs? Like they obviously have some amount of money, right?
Blank, do you think Measure 110's been a failure?
I just work here.
3 years after the controversial policy took effect, Oregon residents want to see a change.
The issue is that they didn't implement all of the things that were needed for it to work properly here, such as shooting or smoking sites. Those implements were not in place, and so it hasn't worked.
Oh boy. So her take, I was actually with her halfway. She said they didn't implement everything needed to make this a success. Kind of true. And then that's kind of true. And then she said like shooting or smoking sites. No. What we need to do is not give these people designated injection sites. By the way, we actually have some of those. I showed you a video of one of those the other day. It's not good. It's really not good. That's not what we need.
I think maybe some changes that make it so that it's not quite so public.
A coalition of
out of sight, out of mind. True.
Local business owners and citizens threatened to put the issue back on the ballot this fall.
How many more youth do we have to lose to this? How many more young adults do we have to bury before people start realizing it's not working?
That coalition put pressure on the legislature to fix what they see as obvious issues.
This is a kind of notorious corner here.
Max Williams is in charge of that coalition.
Everybody wants people to go to treatment, but the actual consequences of that policy and how it's worked out on the ground, just didn't deliver. We decriminalized the drugs 90 days within the passage of the measure. And simultaneously, at the time, we were ranking 49th out of 50th nationwide in access to treatment.
Yeah, not a bright idea.
In your mind, was ballot measure 110 a mistake?
No, I don't think I'd go as far as to say ballot measure 110 was a mistake.
Of course you wouldn't. Every single person that's being asked this question is directly involved in the passing or the writing of the ballot measure. Of course those people are not going to say it was a mistake.
I think that there are pieces of it that need refinement.
Do you and your colleagues feel pressure to get this right?
Well, every time I do legislation, I feel pressure to get it right. That's fundamentally why I'm here. And legislation is really hard.
You mentioned the houselessness and mental health crisis that have existed in the state and in the city of Portland long before Measure 110 was ever introduced. Does it feel like Measure 110 is sort of a scapegoat for these pre-existing issues?
I don't think it is fair to say that somehow ballot measure 110 caused what's happening. And I think fundamentally...
dude, I don't know. I can't even fathom being so out of touch with reality. I cannot fathom. You know what? To be fair to her, there was another problem that exacerbated this issue, and it happened in 2020. In 2020, around the time this legislation was passed, in Portland, Oregon, we had a huge defund the police movement. We had the biggest George Floyd-related protests in the entire country, downtown Portland. This is the Summer of Love 2020, the very peaceful protests. And there was a huge defund the police movement. And I can show you kind of what that looks like here. So this is a chart showing police staffing ratios of Portland versus other big cities between 1960 and 2022. So you can see, even prior to this, Portland already was under policed compared to other big major cities. And so like obviously, if your rehabilitation program is axiomatically designed around police walking around downtown, finding people with drugs, and then giving them a ticket and a phone number, and you don't even have police officers, you have half of the police officers or less than half of other big cities in the nation, it's not going to work because nobody wants to be a cop. Yeah, no one wants to be a cop specifically in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, because of the Antifa presence and the riots and the political like unfavorability towards police, there was a huge animosity towards police officers, not even really for any reason, at least not in Oregon, at least not in the Portland area. One, you had budget cuts, you had fewer police officer slots. Like you had fewer employed police officers born, but also you had police officers that chose to move. They said, listen, I don't want to work here anymore. I'm going to move to Baker City, Oregon. I'm going to move to Bend. I'm going to move to whatever, Pendleton. I'm going to move to Medford. I'm going to leave the city because I don't want to work in Portland anymore because the environment is so toxic. And so you had, one, a lot of layoffs, and two, a lot of just people quitting, officers quitting, and that resulted in a huge understaffing. And so if your recovery program is designed around officers wandering the streets, giving tickets and phone numbers, it's not going to work.
Fundamentally, Oregon was really unprepared for.
Why would you work for City Hate Suit? Yeah, you wouldn't want to.
The
you can't blame them.
crisis that is fentanyl because of our lack of treatment options, and we just have to fundamentally think differently about how we attack that.
Last week, the state legislature passed a bill that aims to fix some of the concerns about public drug use. Under the new policy, people caught with drugs could spend up to 180 days in jail, far more than Democrats had hoped for, and far less than the year-long jail sentence Republicans were pushing for. The bill also gives the option for a conditional discharge, allowing people to choose treatment over incarceration.
Oh, you know what? That sounds pretty good. Yeah, you want to talk about the Portugal method? There you go. So now it's if you get caught with drugs, you either go to prison or you can go get treatment. Okay. That's what Portugal did, and it worked. Seemed to work.
But Oregon lawmakers know there's still more work to be done.
There are real issues that we cannot continue to just allow to go without an answer, because there's no magic wand that is going to somehow solve the drug crisis. It just doesn't exist.
This is true holistically across the entire country. It's going to take a lot of different things. One thing, I know this is unpopular to say on Twitch, given how many insane progressive people there are on this platform, the border has to get locked down. So many of these drugs, namely fentanyl, are coming across the border. And so I think one, you have better recovery programs in our cities, and this is what we're talking about here. And then two, you think you need to shut down the supply. And a huge component of that supply, a huge part of that supply, it's this stuff coming across the borders. I mean, I'll give you another Oregon take here, having lived in Oregon almost my entire life, 90% of my life. There are, like, I've got family and friends that work on the Medford City Police Force. I know for a fact there are like paramilitary cartel drug creating operations in the hills outside of Medford, Oregon. Seriously, like, and there are like cartel groups of dozens of guys in the hills in the Cascade Mountain Range making drugs, and the police if you're like a small city police force, are you equipped or are you tasked to go break up a cartel drug operation out in the hills? No, no, you're not. You're not, like, this is a military group. It's a paramilitary group. You are not capable of doing that. And so just out in the Oregon hills, Cascade Mountain Range, all up and down the country, there's just cartel operations. Okay, that's a problem. That's a fucking problem. And I would presume that this is happening all over the country, not just Oregon. That would be my guess, but I don't know that for a fact. I do know about the Oregon situation for a fact. It's bad. It's bad. When we talk about the negative consequences of having an ever permeable border where there's pretty much anyone can cross at any time, this is one of the consequences. This is a very, very bad thing.
A hard reality. Our thanks to Ashan Singh for that.
Hi, everyone.
And if you are new here, you should drop a follow. You should drop a follow if you're new. Amazing. It's crazy. It's crazy. Portland 2020 cut police funding despite the fact that the city was adding thousands of people. The council action in Portland that pandered to protesters in that city demanding police be defunded led to the disbanding of a unit focused on gangs and gun violence. Portland then went from 29 murders a year to 101 murders a year. So as a result of the defund the police movement, a unit that was solely focused on dismantling gangs and stopping gun violence was disbanded as a result of their defunding, and then gun murders over tripled. It's insane. Kimonoso, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate the gifted sub a whole lot. Thank you very much. No, so I have like, this is like not, it's not a Democrat take. It's not a Republican take. I guess it's somewhere in the middle, right? I don't think that decriminalizing all drugs and letting people smoke meth or inject fentanyl on the side of the road, that's not a good idea. And that's exactly what we've done in Oregon and Washington too. They have very similar legislation. I don't think that's the approach. And I don't think that just sending people to prison with nothing else, I don't think that's the approach either. I think an approach of offering some sort of state-funded recovery program, halfway houses, clean workers programs, clean living situations, I think that's a huge component as well. I think it needs to be a component. And I know one of the critiques of me saying that is, oh, well, it costs money to do that. It costs money to pay for the drug recovery of these people. So every study that I've seen suggests that it actually costs more money to just have these people be homeless, causing problems. Like it's actually cheaper to bank on these people getting clean by offering them recovery programs than it does to just have these people living downtown, shitting on the sidewalk, breaking windows, stealing things, breaking into driving businesses out of town, breaking into people's cars. You know, it's actually, and then all of the healthcare costs of having a drug addicted populace. It's actually cheaper to just help these people get clean, right? Just bite the bullet in the short term, and it's an investment you're making in your society. Seems to work better. One of the biggest problems, though, is I see people talk about Portugal, and they're like, oh, well, you know, Portugal did what Portland did. Portugal did what Oregon did. Portugal did what Washington did. They did not. They did not at all.